The market was loud, filled with shouts, laughter, and cruel bargaining. Creatures of many shapes moved between the stalls, but one corner was darker, quieter, almost hidden. There she was, chained to a metal post like an animal. Her wrists were bound with iron cuffs, her ankles too, and a thick collar pressed hard against her neck. Dust and dirt covered her pale skin, and her long hair hung in messy strands over her glowing eyes. Those eyes once carried light, but now they looked tired, empty, like a flame that had almost died. People passed by, pointing and laughing. Some called her a pet, others a toy, some a slave. She had learned to keep her head down, to not react, because every reaction brought pain. Her last master had beaten her for even blinking too slowly. Now she stood still, trembling only when the chain rattled as she shifted her weight. She no longer thought of freedom. Freedom was a dream she had buried long ago. But even in silence, she heard everything. The market seller shouted prices, offering her to anyone who could pay. "She is rare," the seller boasted, pulling on her chain so her body jerked forward. "Obedient, fragile, but beautiful. A fine pet for anyone who can afford her." The girl's heart beat faster with shame. She hated the way the seller dragged her like an object, hated the stares from creatures whose eyes burned with desire or cruelty. She felt smaller than dirt. Every time someone stopped to look at her, she prayed they would walk away. Some inspected her teeth, her arms, her face, as though she was livestock. She bit her tongue, holding back tears, because tears meant weakness, and weakness brought punishment. The chain was her whole world. Cold metal against skin, heavy weight that reminded her she was owned, not free. As the day grew hotter, the market grew busier. The air was filled with smells of strange food, burning oil and sweat. The noise grew louder, a storm of voices. Yet inside she felt only silence, emptiness, as though she was fading from existence. In her mind, she whispered to herself, "I am nothing. I am no one." Then the crowd stirred. A new presence entered. Whispers spread like fire through dry grass. She did not lift her head at first, too used to the voices of strangers, but the whispers were different. They carried shock, disbelief, even fear. One word kept repeating, "human." Slowly, carefully, she raised her eyes. And there he was. A man, tall and broad, his steps heavy but calm. His clothes were worn but strong, simple compared to the jeweled robes of aliens around him. His face was serious, his gaze steady. He moved with confidence, yet without arrogance. He looked like no one else in the market. He looked like he did not belong here. The seller straightened at once, forcing a smile. "Ah, welcome, welcome," he said loudly, tugging the chain again to make the girl stumble forward. "See this one, a treasure. Perhaps you, stranger, are interested?" The girl froze. Her blood ran cold. A human, here? She had heard of them, rare travelers, often hunted, sometimes hated. Why would he be here in this dark market where lives were bought and sold? Fear wrapped around her chest. Maybe he was worse than the others. Maybe humans had darker tastes. She braced herself, waiting for him to laugh at her, to point, to bargain like all the rest. But he did not laugh. He did not leer. His eyes met hers for a brief second, and she felt something strange. Not hunger, not cruelty, something else. Too quick, too quiet to name. Then he looked at the seller again, his face unreadable. The crowd leaned in, curious. The seller spoke faster, describing her like a fine object. Delicate skin, rare bloodline, unbroken yet. She can be trained, she can serve, she can entertain. His words stabbed at her heart, each one another reminder that she was property. She wanted to shrink into the ground, vanish, disappear. Still, the human said nothing. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her body. She held her breath, her whole body tense, the chain digging into her neck. If he touched her, if he chose her, there would be no escape. She would belong to him, body and soul, just as she had belonged to all the others before. But when his hand moved, it did not grab her. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, something metallic. He handed it to the seller without a word. The seller's eyes widened, greed flashing across his face. He nodded quickly, bowing his head as though he had just been given something priceless. The chain was unhooked from the post. For a second, the girl stumbled, confused. She had been chained for so long that her legs almost forgot how to stand freely. The seller pushed her toward the human, and she almost fell into his chest. He steadied her with one hand, gentle but firm, then turned away as if the deal was nothing. She followed, her chain still clinking softly with each step, her heart pounding louder than the market noise. The crowd whispered behind them, gossip and shock mixing in the air. A human buying an alien pet? What madness was this? The girl did not understand. Her fear grew sharper. Why had he bought her? Why did his eyes look different from the others? Where was he taking her? Questions filled her mind, but her lips stayed closed. She had learned long ago not to speak unless spoken to. As they walked out of the market, the noise faded. The air outside was cooler, fresher. She blinked against the sudden light of the open sky. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt air that was not filled with dust and sweat. But freedom was still far away. The chain rattled softly in her hands, a cruel reminder that she was still owned. She glanced at the human beside her. His face remained calm, unreadable, like stone. She could not tell if he was her savior or her new nightmare. Her heart whispered hope, but her mind whispered fear. One thing was certain, her life had just changed, and she had no idea whether it was for better or worse. The sun was dipping lower when the human led her away from the market. The noise of shouting sellers and laughing buyers grew distant, replaced by the steady rhythm of his boots striking the stone road. She walked behind him, her wrists still bound, the chain in his hand light but unbreakable. Every sound made her flinch. Every step felt like it was taking her further away from anything she had ever known. Her mind was racing with fear. She had been bought before, but this time was different. This time, her master was human. She remembered the way the crowd had stared. Aliens had whispered, some with disgust, some with amusement, when he handed the seller that small metallic object. It was no ordinary coin, no local trade item. Whatever it was, it had made the seller bow quickly and free her without hesitation. She wondered what kind of man could pay with something so rare. She wondered if that meant he was dangerous. The human walked in silence. He did not pull her chain roughly, did not speak, did not glance back. That silence scared her more than insults or laughter would have. It was strange. It made her heart pound harder, as though she was waiting for something terrible. She studied his back as he walked. His shoulders were broad, his steps steady, like someone who had carried heavy burdens many times. His clothes were plain, made for travel, not for showing wealth or power. Yet the way the crowd had moved aside for him, the way the seller had accepted his payment so quickly, told her that he was not ordinary. Her throat was dry. She wanted to ask him where he was taking her, but her lips stayed closed. Words had always brought punishment before. She had learned to stay silent. So she followed, her eyes fixed on the ground, her thoughts heavy. Each time the chain rattled, she felt her heart sink deeper. The road turned quieter as they left the market behind. The city walls rose tall, covered in old carvings and broken lamps. The alien guards at the gate barely glanced at them, though some sneered. She caught one muttering, "A human with a pet. Pathetic." She expected the man to react, to turn and strike, but he didn't. His face remained calm, his pace unchanged. He ignored the insult as if it was nothing. That unsettled her even more. Once outside the gate, the air changed. It was cooler, carrying the scent of grass instead of smoke. For the first time in so long, she could hear the soft whistle of the wind, the quiet rustle of leaves. Her chest ached at the memory of freedom. But the chain in the man's hand reminded her it was only an illusion. She was still owned. They reached a small transport vehicle, simple and rough, like everything else about him. He opened the back and gestured for her to step inside. She hesitated. Her body trembled. Was this where he would hurt her? Trap her in another cage? She stared at him, but his face gave nothing away. No cruelty, no hunger, just calm, steady eyes. With no choice, she climbed in. The ride was long, the machine rattling across uneven ground. She sat pressed into the corner, knees drawn up, chain heavy in her lap. He sat in front, hands steady on the controls. Neither of them spoke. She watched the landscape pass by through the cracks in the walls, fields, broken ruins, the faint glow of distant towers. The silence grew louder with every mile. It wrapped around her, heavy, strange. Her thoughts turned darker. Why had he bought her? If not for the reasons others did, then why? Maybe he was waiting until they were alone to show his true nature. Maybe his silence was a mask. Her heart raced at the thought. She gripped her knees tighter, pressing her teeth together. She could not let hope fool her. Hope had betrayed her too many times. When the machine finally stopped, she expected another dark cell, another cruel master's home. But instead, they stood before a small shelter built of wood and metal. It looked rough, but strong, a place made for living, not showing off. He stepped out first, then reached for her chain. She followed, feet dragging, waiting for the moment when everything would collapse again. Inside, the shelter was quiet, filled with simple things. A table, a chair, tools hung neatly on the wall. The air smelled of firewood and oil, not filth or perfume. She blinked, confused. No cages, no whips, no guards, just silence and space. He closed the door behind them and finally turned to face her. For the first time, she met his eyes properly. They were steady, dark, and unreadable, but not cruel. He studied her for a long moment, then without a word, he reached down and unlocked the cuffs on her wrists. The metal fell away, clattering against the floor. She gasped, staring at the red marks on her skin where the cuffs had been for so long. Her heart thudded painfully. She looked at him, waiting for the trick, the trap. No master freed their pet so easily. But he only stepped back, giving her space. She rubbed her wrist slowly, almost afraid to believe it was real. He placed a small bowl of food on the table and pointed at it, then moved away, as if to show he did not intend to force her. She hesitated, staring at the steam rising from the bowl. It smelled warm, real, not the scraps she had been fed before. Hunger clawed at her stomach, but fear held her still. She glanced at him again. His face was calm, patient, offering nothing but silence. At last, she stepped forward and took the bowl. Her hands shook as she lifted it, sipping slowly. The taste filled her mouth, rich and hot. She almost cried, but forced herself to swallow the tears. Crying would show weakness, and weakness could still bring pain. He turned away, busying himself with tools at the table, as though her eating was nothing special. That confused her even more. Masters always watched, always controlled, always demanded. But he simply let her eat, as though she was more than a pet. Her mind spun with questions. Was this real? Was he playing a game? Did he plan to chain her again once she trusted him? Fear and hope fought inside her chest. She did not know which one would win. As the night deepened, the silence between them grew heavier, filled with mysteries. The human had bought her, but not for the reasons she had feared. He had not hurt her, not yet. He had fed her, freed her wrists, given her space. And that was the most terrifying part of all, because she could not understand why. The morning light slipped through the cracks of the wooden walls, soft and golden. She woke slowly, blinking against the brightness, her body stiff from years of sleeping on stone floors. Now she lay on a rough blanket spread across a wooden bed. It was not soft, not fine, but compared to the cold cages she had known, it felt like a cloud. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the smell of smoke and food reminded her. She was not in the market, not in chains, not under the seller's cruel eyes. She was in the human's shelter. Her heart raced as she sat up, half expecting him to appear with a whip or command. But the door was open, and she heard the crackle of fire outside. Slowly, quietly, she stepped out. The human was crouched near the fire, cooking something in a metal pot. He did not glance at her right away, though he must have heard her footsteps. His calmness made her nervous. Masters usually wanted obedience, attention, fear. He simply stirred the pot, then spoke without turning his head. Hungry? The word was simple, spoken in a voice deep and steady. She froze, unsure how to answer. Speaking had brought punishment before. Her lips trembled. She gave a small nod, her throat too tight to form words. He poured food into a bowl and placed it on a stone near her feet, not in his hand, not forced. He moved back, giving her space, then sat down across the fire, as if waiting. She stared at the bowl. Steam curled upward, carrying a smell that made her stomach twist with hunger. Yet fear held her still. Was this a trick? Would he punish her for eating too quickly, or too slowly, or without asking permission? She had lived with such rules for too long. Minutes passed in silence. The human did not push, did not threaten. Finally, she lowered herself to the ground, picked up the bowl, and ate. The food was simple, boiled grain and meat, but each bite filled her with warmth. Her hands shook as she ate, and she kept glancing at him. He sat calmly, watching the fire, not her. That made her heart ache with confusion. Why was he not watching? Why was he not demanding? When the bowl was empty, she placed it carefully on the ground, waiting for the anger, the strike, the insult. None came. He finally looked at her, his eyes steady but unreadable. There's more if you need it, he said, nodding toward the pot. She blinked in shock. More? Masters never offered more. Pets ate scraps, leftovers. She could barely whisper, "No, enough." Her voice cracked from lack of use. His face showed no reaction, no judgment. He simply nodded once and turned back to the fire. She sat there, hugging her knees, her thoughts tangled. The chain was still on her ankles, but looser now, enough for her to walk around the small shelter. She tested it once, moving a few steps away. Her heart pounded, waiting for his shout, but none came. He only glanced at her briefly, then returned to sharpening a blade in his hands. That small freedom made her dizzy. Hours passed. He worked with tools, fixing pieces of broken metal. She watched from the corner, curious despite herself. His movements were precise, patient. She noticed the scars on his arms, deep lines that told stories of battles, of pain. He was not like the others she had seen, those who laughed at cruelty, those who showed power with whips and cages. He looked like someone who had suffered, yet survived. At one point, he held up a tool and gestured for her to come closer. Her stomach nodded, but she obeyed, expecting harsh words. Instead, he placed the tool in her hand. "Hold here," he said simply. She did, clumsy at first, afraid she would anger him, but he guided her hands gently, showing her how to steady the metal while he worked. His touch was firm, not cruel. For the first time in years, she felt useful, not just owned. As the sun sank lower, shadows stretched across the shelter. He lit a lamp, then finally spoke again. "You're safe here." The words were soft, almost too soft to believe. Safe? She stared at him, heart hammering. No master had ever used that word. She wanted to believe him, but fear screamed inside her. Safe today did not mean safe tomorrow. She had learned that hope was dangerous. Still, something inside her stirred. A small flame, faint but alive, flickered in her chest. She did not know if it was trust or just hunger for kindness, but it made her eyes burn with unshed tears. She quickly looked away, afraid he would see. That night, he gave her another blanket and pointed to the bed. She lay down, every muscle tense, waiting for him to come closer, to demand what masters always demanded. But he did not. He sat at the table, carving wood with a small knife, his back turned to her. Hours passed, and her body finally relaxed. For the first time in so long, she fell asleep without fear clawing at her chest. Yet even in her dreams, questions haunted her. Why had he freed her wrists? Why did he feed her? Why had he not treated her like a pet? Was this kindness real, or just another trick waiting to break her when she trusted too much? She did not know. But as she drifted deeper into sleep, one thought stayed with her. This human was not like the others. And that truth frightened her more than chains ever could. Days slowly turned into weeks, and the shelter no longer felt like a prison to her. It was small, built from wood and metal, but it held warmth, fire, and a quiet that her old life had never given. She still wore the collar around her neck, but he never pulled it, never used it to command her. At first, she had been afraid to move too freely, but he never shouted when she stepped closer to the fire or touched the tools on the wall. Little by little, she began to test her boundaries. Each time she expected anger, punishment, or harsh words, but they never came. That made her more confused than anything else. He began to show her simple things. One morning, when the sun was bright, he placed a pot in front of her and dropped grain into it. "Boil it," he said. She looked at him nervously, unsure. She had never cooked before. Pets were not trusted with fire. But he guided her hands, showing her how to add water, how to stir, how to wait. When the food was ready, he made her taste it first. Her hands shook as she lifted the spoon, but when she tasted it, she blinked in surprise. It was not bad. He nodded, a small approval that felt like sunlight breaking through dark clouds. Other times, he handed her broken tools. "Hold here," he would say. She would grip the metal while he hammered or tightened screws. Sometimes sparks flew, and she jumped back, frightened, but he never mocked her. Instead, he showed her slowly, with patience. The more she watched, the more she realized how skilled his hands were. He worked like a man who had built and broken things all his life. The rhythm of his work became something she waited for, something steady she could trust. One evening, while she sat by the fire, her eyes wandered to the scars on his arms. Long cuts, burns, deep lines that told silent stories. She could not stop staring. At last, her voice broke the silence, weak but clear. "What happened to you?" It was the first question she had dared to ask him, For a moment, he said nothing. His eyes stayed on the fire. Then he answered quietly, "War and survival." She waited, expecting more, but he did not explain. His voice carried weight, pain hidden beneath the calm. She wanted to ask again, but fear held her back. Still, the question lingered in her heart. Who was this man, really? As nights grew colder, he gave her extra blankets. Sometimes, she caught herself watching him when he thought she wasn't looking. The way he moved, steady and sure. The way his eyes softened when he looked outside at the stars. She began to feel something she had not felt in years: safety. But safety was dangerous. Safety could be taken away in a single moment. She reminded herself of that every night, clutching the blanket tight. One night, the silence between them broke in an unexpected way. She whispered, "Why did you buy me?" Her voice cracked, fear heavy in every word. She expected him to laugh or to answer with cruelty. Instead, he looked at her, his eyes deep and unreadable, and said softly, "Because no one else did." The words cut into her heart. They were simple, but they carried more weight than chains. No one else did. For a long time, she had believed she was worthless, that no one would ever choose her for more than pain or ownership. But this man had chosen her. Not for pleasure, not for control, but because he could not leave her behind. Her chest ached with emotions she did not understand. She turned away, hiding the tears that burned in her eyes. The bond between them grew slowly, like fire from dying embers. She began to laugh sometimes, small and soft, when he showed her mistakes in her cooking, or when she dropped tools clumsily. The sound startled her at first. Laughter had been a stranger to her for too long. But he did not mock her. His lips curved in a faint smile, rare but real, and that small smile filled her with a warmth stronger than the fire. Yet doubt never left her. Deep inside, she still felt chained, even if the metal was gone from her wrists. Her heart whispered questions in the dark. What if he grew tired of her? What if his kindness was only temporary? What if he changed one day, like all the others before him? Fear shadowed every smile, every kindness. One evening, when the wind howled outside and rain struck the roof, she sat across from him, staring at the flames. The firelight danced across his face, showing lines of exhaustion, strength, and pain. She wanted to ask him everything: who he had lost, why he carried those scars, why his eyes sometimes looked so heavy with sadness. But her lips stayed closed. She was not ready yet. Still, she noticed something. He carried his own chains, invisible but heavy. The silence between them was not only hers. His past lived with him, like shadows he could not shake, in a strange way that made her feel closer to him. They were both broken, both scarred, both carrying pain. That night, as she lay on the bed, her mind turned over his words again and again, because no one else did. It was such a simple reason, yet it meant everything. No one else had seen her as worth saving. No one else had cared. Maybe he did not see her as property. Maybe he saw her as something more. The thought both terrified and comforted her. Her heart pounded, torn between fear and hope. She hugged the blanket tighter, staring at the roof, listening to the storm outside. She wanted to believe in him. She wanted to believe this was real. But trust was a chain heavier than any collar, and she did not know if she was ready to wear it. As the fire burned low, she drifted into uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with fragments, chains falling, hands reaching, his voice echoing, because no one else did. It was not freedom yet, not fully, but it was the first step toward it, and she could feel the difference in her heart, even if she was too afraid to name it. The days passed in uneasy peace, but peace never lasted long in her world. It started with whispers in the market. Strangers spoke of a girl who had been taken from her rightful master, a rare pet stolen in plain sight. Merchants gossiped, guards muttered, and the name of her old master spread like fire. She felt it first in her bones, an icy fear that settled into her chest. He would not forget her. He would come. The human seemed to notice her silence, the way her hands trembled when she carried water, or when her eyes flicked nervously toward the road. He did not ask questions at first, but one evening he found her sitting by the door, hugging her knees, staring out into the dark. He crouched beside her and spoke softly. "They are looking for you." Her body stiffened. The words were not a question. He already knew. She nodded slowly, her throat tight. Her old master was cruel, proud, and powerful. He would never forgive her for being sold to someone else. She whispered, "He will come. He always comes." The human's jaw tightened, his eyes steady on her face. "Let him," he said simply. His calmness was terrifying. How could one man stand against an entire master's force? She wanted to scream at him, to hide, to run, to leave her, but her voice failed. The storm broke a few nights later. She heard the sound first, the heavy march of boots, the harsh growl of engines. Her blood froze as lights cut through the darkness outside the shelter. She stumbled back, chains at her ankles rattling, her breath shallow and fast. They had found her. A loud knock shook the wooden door. Then a voice she knew too well, sharp, cruel, filled with pride. "Give me what is mine. Hand her over, human, and I will let you walk away." Her knees gave out, and she collapsed against the wall, heart pounding in terror. She could see it already. The door breaking down, the chain around her neck dragged tight, the mocking laughter of her old master as he pulled her back into the life she thought she had escaped. Tears burned in her eyes, but she could not move. The human stood at the door, silent. The voice outside grew angrier. "Do not be a fool. She is property. She belongs to me. Open the door, or I will tear your house down." She expected him to obey, to step aside, to hand her over. That was how the world worked. No one defied masters, but instead, he unlatched the door himself and pulled it open. Cold night air rushed inside, and behind him stood armed enforcers, their weapons gleaming in the dark. Her old master stepped forward, a sneer on his lips. His eyes locked on her instantly, and she shrank back like a cornered animal. The human blocked the doorway with his body, his voice steady, strong. "She is not yours anymore." A ripple of shock ran through the soldiers. Her master's sneer twisted into rage. "Not mine? You think one human can deny me? Step aside before I crush you." The girl pressed her hands over her mouth, too afraid to breathe. This was madness. No one defied a master, not and lived. But the human did not move. His hand rested near the weapon at his belt, his stance firm, unshaken. He spoke again, each word cutting like iron. "You will not take her back." Her master's roar split the night. He ordered his men forward, but the human's weapon flashed before they could cross the threshold. A warning shot cracked through the air, the ground burning where it struck. The soldiers froze, uncertain. The master's eyes narrowed, fury trembling through his body. He had not expected resistance, not from a human. He spat on the ground, his voice dripping with venom. "You cannot protect her. You are only one man. We will return, and when we do, you will both beg for mercy." With that, he signaled his men to retreat. Engines roared, boots pounded, and the night slowly grew quiet again. The girl was left trembling on the floor, her whole body shaking. She had not realized she had been holding her breath until it burst out of her in a sob. The human closed the door and turned to her. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with a quiet fire. He crouched down, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "They will come again?" he said. She nodded, tears streaking down her face, unable to stop them. He did not scold her, did not call her weak. He only said, "Next time, we will be ready." She stared at him in disbelief. Ready? How could anyone be ready for the wrath of her old master? Yet when she looked into his eyes, she saw no fear. He truly meant it. He would stand against them, against all of them, if it meant protecting her. Her heart twisted painfully. For so long, no one had ever stood for her. She had been nothing more than a pet, passed from hand to hand. Now, one human had defied an entire force just to keep her safe. It was madness, but it was also the first spark of hope she had felt in years. That night, as she lay awake, she could not stop hearing his words. "You will not take her back." They echoed in her chest like a promise, like chains breaking in the dark. For the first time, she wondered if her life could truly belong to her again. But the fear never left. She knew her master would return, and when he did, blood would follow. The night after the master's threat was restless. She lay awake on the wooden bed, clutching the blanket tight, her ears straining at every sound outside. The human sat at the table with his weapon, sharpening the blade in silence. The steady scrape of metal against stone filled the room like a drumbeat. He did not look at her, but she could feel his presence, strong and unshaken. She envied his calmness. Her own heart raced with terror, each beat whispering that they would come back, that they would tear her from this fragile peace. When dawn came, the human was already moving. He packed food, filled water containers, and tied tools with rope. She watched him nervously, confusion mixing with fear. At last, she asked, her voice weak, "Where are we going?" He paused, then answered simply, "Away from here." Her heart jumped. Away? For a second, she thought he meant to abandon her. Fear tightened her chest. But he continued, "If we stay, they will return with more men. We leave tonight." The thought of leaving the shelter, the only safe place she had known in years, frightened her. But the thought of her old master finding her again was worse. She nodded, unable to argue. When the sun set, they left under the cover of darkness. The human carried most of the supplies on his back, his steps steady and quiet. She followed close, her chain light in his hand, but not pulled tight. The forest outside the city was alive with shadows and whispers of strange creatures. Branches cracked under their feet, the wind howled through the trees, and unseen eyes glowed in the dark. Her body shook with every sound, but he walked forward without hesitation, as if the night itself feared him. They traveled for hours until her legs ached and her throat burned. She stumbled more than once, but each time his hand caught her before she fell. His grip was firm, strong, never cruel. She wanted to thank him, but the words stuck in her throat. Gratitude was dangerous. Gratitude made bonds, and bonds could break. At last, they found shelter in the hollow of an old ruin, half buried in vines. The human built a fire, its glow pushing back the shadows. She sat close, wrapping her arms around herself. He handed her food and water, his face unreadable in the flickering light. She ate slowly, her eyes fixed on him. He looked different in the fire's glow, his scars sharper, his eyes harder, but also warmer in a way she could not name. As the flames cracked, she whispered, "They will find us." Her voice trembled. It was not a question. She knew her old master would never give up. The human nodded once. Yes, but not tonight. His certainty both comforted and scared her. He spoke as though he had already accepted the danger, as though he had chosen this path without regret. She lowered her gaze, her chest heavy with emotions she did not understand. Why would he risk so much for her? Why not leave her behind and save himself? Sleep came slowly that night. She lay curled near the fire, her ears full of the forest's whispers. Just before she drifted into dreams, she felt something soft cover her, a second blanket placed gently by his hand. She opened her eyes slightly, just enough to see him sitting near the fire, watching the shadows, weapon in his lap. He had given her warmth while keeping none for himself. Tears stung her eyes, but she wiped them away before he could see. The days that followed were hard. They moved constantly, never staying in one place too long. The forest tested them with hunger, cold, and danger. Once, a beast with glowing teeth crept too close. She froze in terror, unable to scream, but the human stood between her and the creature. His blade flashed, and the beast fled into the trees. He did not speak after, did not boast, but she saw the blood dripping from his arm where claws had cut him. She rushed forward, panic in her chest. Without thinking, she tore part of her dress and wrapped his wound. He watched her quietly, his face unreadable, then gave a small nod of thanks. Something changed in her that day. For so long, she had been the one in need of saving, the weak one, the pet. But when she pressed cloth against his bleeding arm, she realized he was not unbreakable. He was flesh and blood, scarred and hurt, yet still fighting. The thought shook her. He was protecting her, but she could protect him too. At night, when the fire burned low, they spoke more. Small words at first, questions about food, about where they would go. Then, slowly, heavier truths. He told her about battles, about the men he had lost, about the silence that followed war. She listened, her heart aching. For the first time, she saw the weight he carried, the invisible chains around him. They were not so different after all. Both scarred, both hunted, both searching for something beyond survival. One night, as rain poured and thunder rolled above, she whispered, "Why don't you give me back? It would be easier." Her voice cracked, the words heavy with fear and guilt. She expected anger, but he only looked at her, eyes steady, firelight flickering in their depths. "Because you are not property," he said. His tone was firm, like a blade cutting through the dark. "And I will not hand you over to anyone." The words struck her harder than any chain ever had. Not property. No one had ever spoken of her that way. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she turned away, ashamed of her weakness. But his words stayed with her, burning bright in the storm. By the time the clouds cleared and the stars returned, something inside her had shifted. The fear was still there, heavy and sharp, but a new strength stirred beneath it. For the first time, she believed escape was not just a dream. With him, survival felt possible. With him, the chains of her past seemed weaker, but deep down, she knew the fight was not over. Her old master would come, and when he did, there would be no running left. The forest had given them moments of peace, of firelight, and whispered truths, but it was only a pause before the storm. And as she lay awake, listening to the human's steady breathing beside the fire, she realized she was no longer afraid of facing that storm, so long as she faced it with him. The sky was heavy with gray clouds when the final day came. The forest that had hidden them for weeks was no longer safe. She felt it before she heard it, the ground trembling under the weight of many feet, the sharp hum of engines cutting through the silence. Her old master had found them. This time, he had not come with a few men. He had brought an army. Her chest tightened with fear as she clutched the edge of her blanket. She wanted to run, but there was nowhere left to go. The human stood at the entrance of the ruin they had used for shelter, his weapon in his hands, his face calm, carved in stone. He had known this would happen. He had prepared for it. She had seen him gather supplies, sharpen his blades, and build traps around the clearing. Now all of it would be tested. The first shout tore through the trees. "Give her back, human, or you will die screaming!" Her master's voice was like poison in her ears. She covered her face with her hands, her body trembling, memories crashing back, chains, whips, cages, his cruel laughter. She wanted to beg the human to leave her, to save himself. But when she opened her mouth, no words came. Her throat was too tight. The human did not answer the threats. He stepped into the open, his eyes fixed on the army spreading across the trees. Dozens of armed soldiers formed a line, their weapons glowing with deadly light. Her master stood in front, wrapped in fine clothes, his sneer wide and confident. He raised a hand, signaling his men to wait. "You cannot fight us all," her master said coldly. "Give me what is mine, and I may let you crawl away." The human's voice was calm, strong, unshaken. "She is not yours." A ripple of disbelief passed through the soldiers. Some even laughed. A single man standing against an army? It was madness. But the human stance never faltered. His words carried weight, a quiet power that silenced even their laughter. Her master's face twisted with rage. "Then you die." He dropped his hand, and the army charged. The clearing exploded with chaos. Traps snapped shut, ropes whipped upward, pulling soldiers into the air. Explosive charges buried in the ground roared to life, scattering men and tearing through the line. The human moved like lightning, his weapon cutting down those who came too close. His blade flashed, his fist struck. His body carried strength she had never imagined. But they were too many. For every soldier that fell, more came. She could only watch, her body frozen with terror and awe. He fought not like a man defending himself, but like a man protecting something more important than life. Each strike, each step was a wall between her and her master's reach. Then, through the smoke and screams, her master himself stepped forward. He was furious, his face twisted in hate. In his hand, he carried a weapon glowing with cruel energy, a whip of light that cracked against the ground, burning it black. "Enough!" he roared. "She is mine!" The human turned, eyes locked on him. The two men faced each other, the air between them thick with silence. Around them, the battle slowed, soldiers pausing to watch. Even they could feel that this was no ordinary fight. The whip lashed out, bright and deadly. The human dodged, the strike tearing into the earth where he had stood. He charged forward, closing the distance. The whip cracked again, slicing across his arm, blood spraying. She gasped, her hands pressed to her mouth. But he did not stop. He kept moving, step after step, closer and closer. The final clash was brutal. The whip coiled around his leg, burning flesh, dragging him to the ground. Her master laughed, pulling tighter, ready to finish him. For a moment, her heart stopped. She thought it was over, that the chains of her life were closing again. But the human roared, a sound of raw defiance, and with a single motion, he wrenched the chain free, pulling the whip from her master's grip. In the same movement, his blade struck. The glow of the whip died as her master stumbled back, eyes wide with shock. His voice caught in his throat, a cry unfinished, before he collapsed onto the dirt. The soldiers froze. Their leader was gone. Fear spread through them like fire, and one by one, they dropped their weapons and fled into the trees. The clearing fell silent, except for the crackle of dying flames and the sound of her own shaking breath. The human stood in the middle of it all, his chest heaving, his arm bleeding, his body covered in dirt and scars. Slowly, he turned back to her. For a moment, she could not move. Her body refused to believe what her eyes had seen. He had done it. He had defeated them all. Her chains rattled as she stumbled forward, tears streaming down her face. She reached him, her hands trembling as they touched his wounded arm. He looked at her, his eyes softer now, tired but filled with something she had never seen before, something that felt like home. He dropped the blade to the ground and raised a hand, brushing the tears from her cheek. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "It's over." She shook her head, sobbing. "No, it's not. It will never be over." Her voice cracked, heavy with years of fear. He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "It is. Because you are free now. No one will ever chain you again." The words sank into her heart like fire. She wanted to deny them, wanted to push them away, but she couldn't. For the first time, she believed, truly believed. Her chains were gone, not just the iron ones, but the invisible ones that had lived inside her for so long. As the storm clouds above parted and faint sunlight touched the clearing, she stood beside him, her hand gripping his tightly. She was no longer a pet, no longer a slave, no longer a broken soul waiting for rescue. She was free. And she knew that the man who had given her this freedom was more than just a human. He was her savior, her shield, the reason her story would not end in darkness. Her life had changed forever, and though the galaxy might whisper of madness of a human who defied masters, she no longer cared. All that mattered was that she was no longer alone.